After the Supreme Court ruled in 2023 that the use of race in college admissions is unconstitutional, many on the left predicted the demise of the black middle class. But in his new book, Jason Riley argues that one byproduct of a half-century of affirmative action is that it has given people the false impression that blacks cannot advance without special treatment. The book is called The Affirmative Action Myth: Why Blacks Don't Need Racial Preferences to Succeed. So, Jason, let's talk about the book. So your core argument is that affirmative action, as well-intentioned as it might be, hasn't helped the people it's supposed to. Why not?
It has not helped blacks progress as much as blacks have progressed when the objective has been colorblind policies. And so I argue that in the decades leading up to the 1970s, which was the first full decade of affirmative action, blacks were making much faster progress than they made during the affirmative action era.
And this is economic, social progress.
This is both economically, in terms of things like income, labor participation, home ownership rates, as well as educational.
Despite Jim Crow.
Despite Jim Crow, you saw faster rates of growth in black incomes, and you saw a reduction in inequality. In other words, the period in which black incomes as a percentage of white incomes was highest was in the decades before affirmative action. Yet, affirmative action is given credit for the creation of the black middle class. If anything, the evidence shows that the black middle class growth has been slower under affirmative action than it was prior to affirmative action.
Why isn't those facts, why aren't they more prominent in the public debate? I was struck in your book by the example of the NASA scientists, the black women scientists who helped with the space program, founding the space program in the movie Hidden Figures. These were women who made their way, despite the Jim Crow era, with a family focus on education, advancement, but you never hear that.
Well, it's because of a few reasons. One is it does not suit the agenda of a lot of groups today. So if you're a black politician or a liberal politician generally, your focus is on racism and racial inequality, and the idea that we've made progress, or we're making progress, before these huge government interventions in the 1960s and 70s, it sort of undermines your case. And so that's one reason there. If you're an activist on the left, it helps you raise money to say that nothing has changed and nothing will change.
You need to keep those racial disparities front and center.
Exactly. There is a racial grievance industry in this country, if not a racket. And it's quite lucrative, Paul, and that's one of the reasons you don't hear more about the data that I lay out in this book. It does not serve that agenda.
Let's talk about an alternative some people have offered to race-based affirmative action, and that is affirmative action based on economic circumstances. So some people argue that that Harvard and other schools should give a leg up to people who had a rougher go than your average suburban child. What do you think of that?
I'm not a big fan of it. Again, because if you look at the fastest pace of progress and when it was occurring, like between 1940 and 1960, you saw a 40 percentage point drop in black poverty without class-based affirmative action, Paul. And so I don't believe it's necessary. I believe that putting your thumb on the scale for one group, whether it's based on their class, based on their race or ethnicity or so forth, is not doing any favors to that group. What groups generally need is a development of human capital, skills, habits, behaviors, and attitudes that are conducive to upward mobility. And preferences put in place perverse incentives, whether they're based on race or class. In the terms of higher education, however, what class-based affirmative action still leaves you with is what's called the mismatch problem. In other words, to give an advantage to someone who is sort of from a low economic background, but still does not meet the same requirements as other kids at that school, is not going to help that kid, whether they're low income, whether they're black, whether they're the child of alumni or a donor. It does not help. What you want to do is make sure kids academically are matched with the right school.
Well, all other things being equal, test scores, GPA, or whatnot, are very close to equal. Wouldn't you want to give the leg up to the student who is, say, of a single mother, as opposed to the child of two very prominent and successful parents in the suburbs?
It depends on whether that child will do well at that particular school. And that's the problem. In other words, I'm also worried that the same schools that were lying to us for decades about how they were using race will do the same things in terms of how they are doing class. They've given us no reason to trust them or take them at their word, and class will simply be used, I fear, as a proxy for race.
For race, that's it. So they'll disguise the use of race behind class. Okay, thank you, Jason, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
We have to take one more break. When we come